Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of TBR. I'm George Binns, and this evening's guest is a return engagement with Jim Modugno. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, George. I appreciate it.
I guess the issue comes down to one of lots of people are pushing electric vehicles. In fact, I was thinking of getting one of these Mavericks. And it's not a full electric, it's a hybrid. But every one that is going to be built for the next year is already sold. So they get to be very popular. And the other half of the question is, how are we going to do that? And what is the reality of switching from gasoline to electric, either as a hybrid or as a full-up battery-powered?
Yeah. If you recall, it was about 1 year ago that we actually visited electric vehicle power and so forth.
Yeah.
Recently, a couple weeks ago, we saw Charlie Baker had conveyed his vision of what the state of Massachusetts would be in terms of helping us to get to energy efficient in terms of starting with EVs, right, electric vehicles. And in reading what he said, I said to myself, all right, I need to go back and look and see if anything has changed in the last 12 months. Yeah. Have we done anything to improve the grid? Have we done anything about certain things? So I took Charlie's information that he shared in his public releases as being the baseline of what we need to do. Yeah. So in Massachusetts, right today, there's 18,000 electric vehicles. Only 18,000. Yeah. His goal is to put 300,000 more onto the road over the next 4 years, which would bring us up to about 13% of the vehicles in Massachusetts.
Okay, so it's still just a blip.
It's a blip, and his vision is that obviously the energy that cars take in terms of carbon emissions represent about 40% of what the state has for emissions, right, for the carbon credit type of thing.
Yeah.
So when I looked at all this data, I started to look at it from the standpoint of not only just the EVs, what do they have in terms of charging stations and other things like that. But before I could get there, I wanted to look at the big picture to see across the country, where are we actually using the information? What is that information? What is the power sources that we have? And what I came across was that fossil fuels today make up 60% of our volume. 60% of the capacity is generated by fossil fuels. You break that down and you go to the next category, it's nuclear power. It's approximately, I'm just going to round the number 20%, it's 19 something, but I'm just going to round to 20. That's 93 nuclear power plants in the United States that are still operating.
Yeah.
And then you go down to the renewables, which is what most people in the green pursuit is interested in, and that's the renewables in terms of wind, hydro, and solar. They only they're about a little under 20% as well. So you can see there's a big gap, and if you go up above and you take a look at the fossil fuels again, natural gas plants are 40% of them today. But under the belief of green, natural gas doesn't cut it, right?
No, that's one of the big changes, because they really pushed natural gas
They did.
over coal and oil.
Correct.
Until they found out that, oh yeah, it also produces plant food, carbon dioxide. And
It's true.
And it's just as, quote, unclean as any of these others.
Absolutely.
And they're finding out that it's a good idea. And the other thing I think you got to mention when you talk about gas-fired plants, they are very flexible. You can crank them up and crank them down depending on what the load is.
You can increase the capacity.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so when you look at that, and there's still a little bit of oil still out there, but very small number, and about still 20% of it is coal, right? So you can see there's some improvements that people could make in taking out maybe the coal plants.
Do you want the chart up?
Yeah, the chat would be nice if we could
Zach, could you put up the first chart, please? Yeah, there we are.
Yeah, that'd be thank you for putting that up. And so when you look at those numbers, the thing that really comes and really gets your attention is the fact that the green initiatives that we've been trying to do have been fairly slow. Think about solar, 2.3%. I have solar panels on my house, all right? Do they help me? Yeah, they do help, no question about it. But the fact of the matter is, when you think about solar, it's only generating when the sun's out.
Yeah.
You get a cloud coverage, generation drops off by about 50%. You have, a storm and the dark clouds and everything, you're generating very little. And if it's nighttime, it's nana. You get nothing, right?
Yeah.
So you look at that and you say, okay, what can you do there? Can we improve on that? Yeah, I think you can probably put more on houses, but they're not free, right?
No.
So then you look at the hydro, and hydro is, when you look at hydros and you look at what's out there, unless you have the St. Lawrence Seaway or the Niagara Falls in the area, or you're in the TVA district that was done years ago, hydro plants are good. I mean, there's nothing wrong with them. They generate only 7.3% of our power today. New York as a state uses a lot of the generation that comes off of Niagara Falls and along the St. Lawrence Seaway, right?
Mm.
So you look at that and you say to yourself, okay, that's not too bad. Wind, on the other hand, is the biggest number that's out there right now is 8.4, but who wants a windmill in their backyard, George? Right?
Yeah, we've had that problem with Nantucket and a few others, and they fought that off for years.
The people who can fight it off are the ones that have the most money.
Yeah.
Right? So they're not going to have them off of Nantucket. They're not going to have them off of Martha's Vineyard. They're not going to have them off of Long Island, right? Down in the Hamptons. It's just not going to happen. So where are they going to be? They're going to be someplace where there's remote. So they're going to be far away from the sources of the actual customers. And that's, if you look at New York as an example, most of their wind farms are north and west of New York City and Long Island. And that's where the power is coming down. The fact of the matter is, they're costly to build, and if you bring them from a long distance, then transmission lines have to be generated, and you need to be able to look at all that energy and see where it comes from. You put them out in the ocean, the cost goes up extremely.
Yeah.
If you looked at your electric bill today, all of us who pay an electric bill, whether it be National Grid or whether it be Eversource or whatever, there's a line in there that for solar. For solar charges, there's one for electric vehicles, and then there's one for clean energy.
Yeah.
So we're already beginning to pay a lot in those utilities. So one of the other things, though, when I looked at the big picture, I said to myself,
one of the things you mentioned, that we dwell on a little longer, is they talk about bringing power from distance. The hydro from Canada has been a big deal for 5 years or so around now.
Yeah.
It still hasn't happened. And it's a problem of the Greens want the hydropower, but the environmentalists don't want to look at the power lines.
exactly.
And it's been shot down and go by trying to push it through Maine. And one of the other interesting things is they mentioned to me that the energy drop, the voltage drop, coming from Canada to Massachusetts, it's equivalent to having another power station.
In between. Yeah.
So there are significant losses in running power from way over there to over here.
And the other thing, too, is when you think about the demand that you're talking about, right, transmission lines and so forth, once you create your capacity in terms of you generate the electricity, whether it be by whatever means you're doing it, it's coming down those lines. The fact of the matter is, if you continue to put strain on the demand, then what ultimately happens is you have to put more transmission lines up because lines can only carry so much capacity.
Yeah.
It's a finite number, right? It's not infinite, right?
Yeah.
So
Well,
you got to watch for those things.
Well, that's the common problem they have in California, where they're running long-distance power lines through, I think they're using aluminum cables, and they get warm, and they sag. And when they sag down far enough, they can throw a spark to a tree. They've started forest fires. So California has been running a series of problems where, the weather's getting too warm, the power demand is up, too many people are running your air conditioners, we got to shut you down.
I'll give you a perfect example. That's the general idea, but here's a specific. So I went and looked at a company like Con Edison out of New York, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to understand how they're doing in the big city and all the other things. And so the example they had is the power flowing from upstate is coming from the hydro and wind. However, the transmission lines coming in, they are using 50% of the capacity. New York is always at 50% of capacity all the time. So think about 365 days a year. Half
Yeah.
of those days, they're at capacity.
Yeah.
74 days on average, they have to ask the communities, the businesses, and others to cut back on their power a year, 74 times, to give you an
Yeah.
example
Hey.
of what they need to do. So they're brownouts. So one of the articles that Con Ed had, which I found interesting, and maybe the viewers will see it as interesting, is there was a taxi service that was going to go all EVs, right, electric vehicles. They're all excited about it. They have 50 of them on order. They're going to, they're going to bring them in. Well, they need a garage. They want to be able to charge them. So they said, we bought a garage. We're going to put 50 chargers in there. Con Ed did the evaluation of it and said, no, you're not. You can't do it.
Yeah.
Because if you do that, you're going to take down the grid in the area.
Yeah.
They could give them 10, but they had to move the other 40 somewhere around the community because of the transmission lines and the power and the grid. So what I'm saying is that we have issues, and we're not really spending a lot of time building anything new. If we want to get away from fossil fuels, you got to pick up the pace. You can't start. If it's important to you today and you're going to be pumping out electric cars left and right, you need to start building the grid better. If the source isn't good enough for you, then what are you going to do? You're not going to get enough from wind, hydro, and solar. They're not dependable. They have too many risks. When the wind's blowing too high, you got to shut the lines down. 45 miles an hour, they shut them, lock down the blades, because otherwise they spin out of control.
Yeah.
Go on YouTube, you can see them spinning out of control when the gearbox breaks, right? So you need that. And, you really need to start building now, not later, now. I looked at this whole thing, and the conclusion that I'm seeing people do, and even Tesla, in terms of Elon Musk and so forth, he's beginning to work on what they call, I think I wrote it down here somewhere, like small module reactors.
Yeah.
And what they can do is they can build a module size actually in a factories and then cart them to a location. And then because they're modular, you can add capacity as the demand in a particular area can come.
Yeah. And Bill Gates is working on something like that up in, I think
He is in Montana.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that's another one of these quirky things about the environmentalists, that a nuclear reactor does not produce carbon dioxide,
Correct.
and yet they're against them. A lot of this stuff is not making sense to me. It doesn't fit a neat pattern saying, we're going to get to there from here, and this is how we go. It looks like it's all over the place, and there's no clean path that I can see. And I think you're bringing up a lot of the points as they're talking about. I think Biden, in one of his speeches, says we're going to have a gazillion charging stations. That's great, but where are you going to get the juice to feed the charging station?
Well, that's exactly right. And if you look at the infrastructure, in which, like Charlie was saying, about the 300,000 vehicles over a 4-year period, I mean, that's nice to say those type of things. He ponied up $13 million so he can put 300 in, I think it's 6 or 8 charging stations in, right? That's not a whole lot of numbers. If you look around for charging stations today, that's one of the problems that people have about with the vehicles, is the fear of they're going to run out of electricity and where do I find a station type of thing. So one of his plans he put through is a climate bill that he put through in 2021. And what it did is it put some pressure on the 2 electric companies, National Grid and Eversource in Massachusetts, to come up with a plan. So they did come up with a plan, and basically what they did is both National Grid, $278 million are going to put into helping for structure for EVs, right? And Eversource is going to put $190 million into it. And what they're really going to concentrate on is they're going to build 14,000 new charging stations, right? 14,000. 300,000 cars, they're going to build 14,000.
Yeah.
So when you look at that, they're going to support EV sharing. They want the vehicle program. So the state is always getting to the point that maybe we need to have sharing of electric cars, because maybe one of the biggest problems when you look at the big picture and you really look at it, it's affordability. When you buy an electric car, it costs you a good $15,000 to $20,000 more. And you can say, I'm going to save all the maintenance and all the preventative stuff that goes on with it. But the fact of the matter is, it's a cost. It's a cost. And they keep saying that eventually electricity is cheaper than gasoline at the pump. Well, is it?
Well, how are you going to make it?
That's the point.
That gets to the point. You're using right now fossil fuels natural gas, oil, or coal to make the electricity that you're going to buy. And when you start to look at the whole picture of, okay, from the time we start making the electricity to the time you use it, it's got to be less efficient than just using either a natural gas powered vehicle, LNG powered vehicles, the big trucks and trains are starting to use that, or get into just running it on gasoline or diesel.
And your point is well taken, George, because that's where the facts are leading us to, is because if you want to go the green, which is the wind, the hydro, and the solar, right now you got all these subsidies that are already in place because it's too costly to generate that way.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't, well, they say, well, the wind's free. Well, everything that goes associated with it isn't free, right?
Yeah.
And so, you got to look at that big picture. When I look at this whole thing, I look at the fact that when people going green is a net loss for middle and low income families. What are they going to do? What are they going to do? People don't want to use natural gas. They want you to buy an EV vehicle. Can people afford that? Can they afford to spend $40,000 on a car or $50,000 on a car? Probably not. And oh, by the way, this is just the tip of the iceberg, because the green initiative is all about, we got to do it now, right? Because in 12 years, everything's going to blow up, right? So because of that, just exactly what you said about the plan, there's no coordinated effort to say, what do we need to do to get there, and how are we going to do it, and what's the plan year by year by year? There isn't anything out there that I can find that is that definitive on it, right?
Yeah.
It can be dynamic, it can be fluid in some degree, but they're driving it forward. And then the next thing is they're going to tell you, oh, by the way, no gas stoves, no gas dryers, and what are people going to do? People are going to can they afford to go and do it? This is really a tax, and this is really a quality of life thing that's being driven onto the everyday person, and they're really strangling the economy. If you think about energy drives the economy.
Yeah.
There's no getting around it. If you have a country that doesn't have energy sources, you're a third world country.
Yeah. And I've heard it said that, okay, the fact that we have electricity in our houses, it's equivalent to having 22 slaves. In the amount of work that can be done by machines and not have to have people do it. And it's a tremendous advantage that everybody has taken to heart. And you start to think about, okay, how are we going to replace all of this? And I think what you're alluding to is Charlie's got this plan that's going to have 100,000 houses converted to all electric. And last year they converted 461.
Got a ways to go.
Yeah, they're running a little short. And reality is catching up. And I went through the numbers on my house, said, okay, if I convert it to electricity, it's going to cost me about $15,000. And I'm assuming I can take my gas boiler and plug in an electric heating rod and run the same system. Then I went through the calculation of, okay, I use so many BTUs of gas a year. National Grid tells me all about it.
Yeah, they do.
And I said, okay, what it would cost me to buy the same number of BTUs in electricity? And it's about an extra $6,000. So it's not a trivial exercise to make this conversion. And what this keeps coming down to, in my mind, is technology advances at its own pace.
It does.
And as it becomes more effective, it displaces something else. But right now, I can't see where EVs or all-electric houses are going to be that much better. I mean, they've had all-electric houses for years, and sooner or later they make the conversion back to something else because the cost of electricity to heat a house is going to be more expensive than burning the fuel to make the heat.
Yeah, back in 1987, when I moved into my house, which is a ranch, right? It's not a very big house, but it's a good house. We still live in it. We had a heater block that was heating the hot water and heating the baseboard and everything. After the first winter, I immediately replaced it with an oil heating system because I could not afford to keep running it. And the same thing's going to happen when you think about this. Charlie's plan, where he's got Eversource and he has National Grid helping to generate all this. I read all the literature, and they're straightforward with it. They're just going to pass it on to the consumer.
Of course.
So everything that goes into this grid and every approach to it is going to increase the cost of people, right?
Yeah.
And that's where it kind of comes. And then if you think about the electric vehicles, I looked at them, but I don't see myself using it that way, right? I'd have to charge it, and if I don't have my charger at home, then you have the chargers that are, you have to go find a charger to put it on. And right now there's 3 different choices that you could do with the charging, and then the trickles are an overnight type of thing, 10 hours, 12 hours, whatever, or the people who go
Zach,
to work.
would you put up the second picture, please?
Yeah, that might help. And you think about a lot of companies have been putting them in. When I was up at Applied Materials before I retired, we had the stations up there. We had 24 of them, right, for our employees. But most of the time there was only like 3 or 4 being used at any given time. I've seen them down in Cumming Center when I go for my walks. So they have them outside, so they've been putting them in, and other people are. But where do you find them all? And where are your stations? And what if you have to really load up when you're going cross country? I bet you I could beat you to the other side of the country in a gas car before you could get there in an electric car.
Yeah, it's the same problem. I think Tesla has a pretty good system where they have fast charging scattered around the countryside.
Yeah.
But they're the only ones.
Yep.
And you run into this problem that, okay, you go to one of these superchargers, still takes you a half hour to recharge your batteries.
Yep.
And they usually tout this thing, well, you just have lunch while your car's being recharged. And I've talked to a couple of people and they said, the last thing I want to do when I'm making a long trip is to kill a half an hour just eating lunch. I want to, pull up to a pump, fill up the tank in 5 minutes, and on my way.
Right, and that's really the difference. You got 5 minutes, or you got maybe 20 minutes, or you might be a couple hours before you can top off or whatever, right? So you think about those things. I mean, you're not going to sit at the gas station, pull out your, you take a book out to read, or read it on a iPad or something like that. I mean, it's just not efficient. I see people sometimes in the morning dropping their car off, especially the weekends. They'll charge it up at the new junior high, right?
Yeah.
And then they're going back and get it later in the day, right?
Yeah.
Because not everybody can put them in their house.
Well, that's the other thing, too. If you want a charging station in your house, you got to change your power supply.
Absolutely.
And if you got a 200 amp supply in the house already, you're probably okay. And you can probably charge it at night at off-peak rates. I haven't heard anybody tout that yet, but they've used to talk about it.
They say they have it, but they had only given it out to 11,000 citizens so far off-peak. And they will extend that for another year, but that doesn't mean they're going to keep it there forever.
Yeah.
So my big picture on this whole thing is I'm concerned that we're not, whether you believe in it or don't believe in it, the fact of the matter, if they want to go down the path of all electricity, they need to pick up the pace, and they got to be coordinated, and they got to be careful they're not destroying our economy while they're doing it, or the quality of life for people in the middle and low income families, because they will. If I'm Silicon Valley genius, right, and I got all the money in the world, I could care less, right? But the average person, maybe you and me, we care about these things.
Well, I think this is where we get back to how the economy runs. And if you're talking about running it based on its own merits, then it will come along at its own pace when it really works. And I had this discussion with one of the guys at the Y about electric cars. And way back when I used to work for a living, it would have been very convenient to have an electric car, take my 10-mile trip into Lynn, come back home, plug it into the house and recharge it. But one of the things is that's a very special vehicle. Maybe it's at most a 2-passenger vehicle, something like a shrunk down Volkswagen Beetle or a Chevy Corvair, some of those relatively small cars. I would be very hesitant to take that out on 128. So that drives me into a situation where I've got to have another car because when I want to take the family anywhere or do any serious shopping, then we need a big car. So this is not fitting a neat picture that I can see.
At times it doesn't look well thought out. I think the intentions are noble, but I don't think they have it well thought out. I don't think they have it lined up. They're not addressing transmission. They're not addressing the sources of the energy. They're just saying no fossils. But what's the solution? Do people want to go nuclear? We talked earlier. You just said people, they don't like nuclear, right?
Yeah.
And you see the problems they're having in Europe now. They're being held hostage because of the power,
Yeah, and
right? The energy.
this proves your point that you made earlier that we are at an economy that's based on having heat and power available 24/7.
Yep.
The problem they had in Texas when they had the snowstorm
Absolutely.
and they had no backup. And this is the whole issue of whatever you do, you need a backup plan because Murphy's Law strikes when you least expect it.
Exactly. And you know, like, even though I have solar panels on my house, I mean, I consume
Yeah,
electricity.
you still
I have
pump
the oil
it
thing.
back into the grid.
Yeah, I can pump it back in, but I also have a generator, a propane powered generator,
Yeah.
because I can't afford to go without electricity
Yeah.
because I heat my house. I got to be able to heat it.
Well, I remember way back when, again, working at one of the guys I know was the rep down at Sikorsky. He went away for vacation, and they had a big storm and power outage, and he came back, all the pipes were frozen. And he didn't realize until he turned the heat on, and the water started spouting everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah.
You know, I mean, you can't afford these kind of problems, and we're living in that kind of an environment where it does get cold.
It does get extremely cold.
Yeah. So I think the point we're getting to is that it might be a good idea
It is.
under very special circumstances. The idea of having remote or autonomous vehicles that are electric powered, that you dial one up on your cell phone when you
yeah.
need one, and it goes away. That might be attractive. But again, if you're talking about commuting, everybody wants one at the same time. How many can you have? So, I mean, this is a systems problem. And I don't think, and I think you made the point earlier, that anybody is really working on the system. How do we make it all work? How does this fit together?
Correct.
And right now it's a bunch of pieces here and there and everywhere that are totally disjointed. And, each one has got its own cheering section. Oh, we got to have EVs. No, we got to have wind farms out in the ocean. No, we got to do something else. And they don't tie together.
Yeah, and it's mainly because the supply chain of the whole process of whether the energy stream isn't being considered as a complete system that goes both ways, right?
Yep.
It's like everybody lives on a dead end street.
Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're thinking about an EV, think twice. And thanks for joining us this evening. And we will have more discussions along this line. And as I indicate, at the end, if you got your own set of comments, send me an email, and there's room for you at the table. Thanks again.